Hello and welcome. If you are a CEF member, you know that people generally trickle in fast and furious to these meetings about a minute or two after the official start time. So we will give it perhaps another 30 seconds to generate a mass group of people, and then we will get started. All right, let's go ahead and get started because we have some wonderful speakers today and a lot of information to cover. So welcome to the annual Committee for Education Funding Budget Book Briefing. In my prepared remarks, I realized that I had not left a moment to introduce myself, so I should do that. I am the current board president for the Committee for Education Funding, and I represent VECTUS DC that supports organizations across the continuum of education. So I'm very honored to be in this position this year. The annual CEF budget book is the response to the administration's fiscal year budget requests. As the oldest and largest coalition of education organizations in existence, the Committee for Education Funding, CEF, provides a strong and unified voice in support of increasing the federal investment in education. And as such, this budget book is the resource for Capitol Hill to understand the need and impact of almost all federal education programs. Our mission is to provide our members, the public, Congress, the executive branch, and the media with information in support of federal investments in education. CEF takes positions on federal education funding issues that represent a consensus of its membership and then communicates those positions to federal government officials and members of Congress. Today's briefing will feature key experts from the ground, including administrators, educators, and even a current college student. Although I think not, because I think she just graduated. Thank you to CEF for hosting the webinar, especially the Executive Director, Sarah Abernathy, Senior Advisor, Cheryl Cohen, and CEF Associate, Jamie Penaritas. With that, I will turn it over to Sarah Abernathy to briefly describe a little bit about CEF.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending. This is one of the highlights for us. CEF does a lot of advocacy on the Hill, but we think this book is a really useful way to communicate some of the benefits of investing in education. Those who know me know that I really can't talk about education funding without throwing a couple slides up there. And just to set the stage for where we are, this is a great time to be talking about investing in education because Congress is just starting the process for fiscal year 25 to make decisions about education funding. And the slide in front of you right now shows in the gold bars Department of Education funding for the last decade plus. And obviously there's a little bit of education funding outside of the Department of Ed, but it's a pretty good proxy. You can see that over the years, education funding was fairly flat for a bunch of years. And that is when there were caps on discretionary spending. The green line above shows what the funding would need to be if the 2011 funding level had kept pace with inflation. The president is proposing a sizable $3 billion increase for fiscal year 25, which is the coming year. It's fairly constrained because there are the cap on all funding really only goes up by 1% from 24 to 25. But that increase from the president still leaves education funding about $13 billion below the 2011 level in inflation adjusted dollars. Jamie, if you can use the next slide, please. To put that in perspective, federal education funding, there it is. Education funding currently is about 2% of the federal budget. It's a tiny wedge. The president's request for next year goes up to 2.3%, and that is in large part because he not because of that $3 billion increase in appropriations, but that there were sizable new investments for free preschool for all, for academic competitiveness, and for college affordability and childcare. The next slide, please. When you ask the public what they think about education funding, the good news is that the public supports increases in, this question was asked about K through 12 funding and childcare, and you can see that 77% of those polled wanted, they opposed cutting funding, and 73% wanted to increase the funding. So we hope that as Congress works its way through the process, which is likely to not be completed until after the election in November, that people communicate why education funding matters to them, and they let their members of Congress know why it matters. The panelists that we're going to hear from today are doing a great job in talking about that in a variety of parts of the education continuum. So with that, I will turn it back to Emily to introduce our panelists. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I will now introduce our wonderful panelists and then pass it to each of them to do a brief overview of the issue and how it relates to the work that they do or the lives they've experienced every day. Monica Waltman is the Director of Special Services at Douglas School District, Box Elder, South Dakota. Before joining the Douglas District 4 years ago, she worked as a special education teacher, primarily with students with behavioral difficulties, as an educational specialist RDA coach for Black Hills Special Services Cooperative. She is in her 4th year serving as a member of the Council for Exceptional Children, the Council of Administrators of Special Education, and South Dakota CASE. She earned a BS in K-12 special education from Black Hills State University, a master's in education from Southwest Minnesota State University, and from the University of South Dakota, both a master's in educational administration and her education specialist degree in superintendency and educational system administration. Dr. Jessica Quinter is the proud principal of Park Forest Elementary in State College, Pennsylvania. This is her 3rd year in the district, leading a K through 5 building with about 430 students. Jessica also serves on the board of directors for the National Association of Elementary Principals as the representative for Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, and has served on the executive committee of the Pennsylvania Principals Association. She was principal of Wanata Valley Elementary for 12 years and served as federal programs coordinator, holding an officer position on the Pennsylvania Association of Federal Programs Board. Jessica is a graduate of Drexel University, St. Francis University, and Juanita College, and holds elementary teaching, reading specialist, and principal K-12 certificates, in addition to her letter of eligibility for the superintendency. Gianna Covarelli is finishing her term as the gubernatorial appointed student regent to the Texas Women's University System Board of Regents. She is a 2nd-generation American and 1st-generation college graduate, having just graduated from Texas Women's University with both a Bachelor's of Science in Political Science, with an emphasis in legal studies, and a Bachelor's of Social Work. Born of her own experiences as a domestic abuse survivor, Gianna's research has centered around the direct impact policy decisions and implementation have on constituents. Gianna has a history of public service, as she formerly served as a Texas senator in a National Youth Senate, co-authoring a criminal justice bill ensuring protection of domestic violence victims, which passed and was later presented to the U.S. House of Representatives. Additionally, she was a member of the American delegation with Running Start at the Reykjavik Global Forum for Women Political Leaders in 2022. Nita Rancourt is the director of Atlantic Technical College and Technical High School, the largest technical college in Florida, serving over 8,000 students at 3 campuses and operated by the School Board of Broward County. Nita has more than 25 years of experience in adult education administration and workforce development, committed to ensuring equitable opportunities for all and aligning adult and technical education programming to meet the evolving needs of industry. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Education and a Master of Arts in Adult Education with postgraduate studies leading to Florida certification in educational leadership and school principal. She has served on various practitioner groups and advisory councils over the years at the local, state, and national levels, and her leadership has been recognized with the Adult and Community Educators of Florida President's Award in 2021, and the John E. Lawrence Florida School Administrator of the Year Award in 2017. And with that, we will start with Monica.
Thank you. I have to apologize in advance. I thought I was losing my voice, and wouldn't that be awesome before I was able to have this amazing experience. However, it's here, and hopefully it holds out for the few minutes that I'm going to be with you today. So I would like to thank the guests of this webinar, members of the press, honored congressional education staffers, for allowing me a little bit of time to specifically discuss a crucial investment in our nation's future, which is early childhood ed. Early childhood ed lays the foundation for lifelong learning, success, and well-being. Typically, when we talk about doing school, we immediately think of reading, writing, and arithmetic. However, doing school requires a complex set of skills that need to exist before learning can even happen. These skills include social skills, emotional skills, organizational skills, executive functioning skills, physical skills, and behavioral skills. And developing these skills is essential for holistic growth and success in the early childhood environment. Research consistently demonstrates that a high-quality early childhood ed program yields numerous benefits, including improved academic achievement, higher graduation rates, enhanced social and emotional and development, increased workforce productivity, and the decreased likelihood of involvement in crime and incarceration. However, despite its proven benefits, access to quality early childhood ed remains unequal. Low-income families and communities of color are disproportionately affected by the lack of access to affordable, high-quality early childhood ed programs. Early childhood ed is a powerful tool for addressing systemic inequalities in education and society. And some of these inequalities include access disparities. The National Institute for Early Education Research stats showed that only 43% of 3-year-olds and 70% of 4-year-olds were enrolled in pre-K. The Economic Policy Institute's statistics on low-income students showed that only 36% of 4-year-olds were enrolled in pre-K. Achievement gaps. Early childhood longitudinal study shared that children from low-income families are already 12 to 14 months behind their peers in language and pre-literacy skills by age 4. These gaps then persist throughout their whole academic career, contributing disparities in high school graduation rates, college attendance, and future earning potential. And the long-term effects, the Journal of Human Resources suggests that participation in a high-quality early childhood education can lead to higher earnings and lower rates of incarceration later in life. Every dollar invested in early childhood education can yield up to $16 in long-term savings in crime-related costs alone. By addressing these inequities through targeted investments in early childhood ed, we can level the playing field for all children and ensure that every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential regardless of their background or circumstances. Some of the economic returns on investment include that studies have shown that every dollar invested in high quality early ed yields a return of up to $7 in long-term savings and benefits to society, such as increased tax revenue, reduced spending on special ed and social services, and a more skilled workforce. Notable studies include the High Scope Perry Preschool Study, ABC Darien Project, the RAND Corporation's analysis, Heckman equation, Brookings Institution's cost-benefit analysis. In addition to advocating for greater investments in early childhood education, as a special ed director, I would be remiss if I did not include ensuring the full funding of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. IDEA promises to provide children with disabilities the support and resources they need to receive a quality education. And as most know, the IDEA, formerly the Education of All Handicapped Children Act, was enacted in 1975. Along with enactment, Congress promised a commitment to fund 40% of the excess of cost of educating students with disabilities. And Congress has consistently failed to fully fund this vital legislation, leaving many children with disabilities without the services and support they deserve. Currently, the federal funding level covers only about 13 to 15%, with a shortfall left to states and local districts. Underfunding the IDEA not only deprives children with disabilities of their right to a quality education, but it also places an undue burden on educators, schools, and families. When schools are forced to divert resources from other programs to meet the needs of students with disabilities, all students suffer. Underfunding the Individuals with Disability Education Act has far-reaching consequences that extend beyond the classroom. And here's just a look at some of the multifaceted impact of underfunding the IDEA. Denial of rights and opportunities. Underfunding the IDEA can result in schools failing to provide students with disabilities the necessary resources and support required by law. This denial of rights and opportunities not only impedes the academic progress of students with disabilities, but it also deprives them of a chance to fully participate in society and achieve their potential. Strain on educators and schools. When schools lack sufficient funding to meet the needs of students with disabilities, educators are forced to make do with limited resources. This places an immense strain on teachers who must juggle the diverse needs of their students without adequate support, training, or resources. Schools may also struggle to provide necessary accommodations and services, leading to a compromised learning environment for all students. Impact on families. Families of children with disabilities often bear the brunt of the underfunding of the IDEA. They may face significant financial, emotional, and logistical challenges in advocating for their child's rights and accessing appropriate services. Many families are forced to navigate complex bureaucratic systems and endure lengthy delays in obtaining evaluations, services, and support for their children. Diminished educational outcomes. Underfunding the IDEA can contribute to lower academic achievement and graduation rates among students with disabilities. Without access to necessary interventions, therapies, and supports, students with disabilities may struggle to meet the academic standards and reach their full potential. And last, the legal and ethical implications. Underfunding the IDEA not only violates the legal rights of students with disabilities, but also contravenes the ethical imperative of providing all children with a quality education. It undermines the principles of equity, inclusion, and fairness that are fundamental to our education system and society as a whole. By fully funding the IDEA, we can uphold the rights of students with disabilities, support educators and schools in meeting the diverse needs of all learners, alleviate burden on families, and promote inclusive and equitable educational opportunities for every child. It's not a matter of fulfilling a legal obligation. It is a moral imperative that speaks to the core values of our society. In South Dakota, thanks to the First Five Fund, the new stats say there's 72,000 children ages 5 and under in South Dakota. 18% are living in poverty. 71% have all available parents in the workforce, and 13% are served by federal and state funded early learning opportunities. The typical annual cost of childcare in South Dakota is $6,700. The Child Care and Development Block Grant only reaches about 19% of eligible families. South Dakota's economy loses about $329 million annually due to childcare challenges. The demand, of course, in South Dakota is no different than anywhere else versus supply. We are struggling. There are several early learning programs that do provide working families with access to high quality, affordable early childhood ed opportunities. But again, the demand for care far outweighs the supply and funding constraints. Again, the Child Care and Development Block Grant, serving about 9% of children birth to 5, early Head Start, serving 17% of eligible children. Head Start is doing a little better, 55% of eligible children served. Maternal, infancy, and early childhood home visiting, 163 families were served. IDEA Part C, which is birth to 3, 1,018 students. And IDEA Part B, Section 619, which is ages 3 to 5, 1,851 children were served. Locally, we see this similar results. Again, Douglas School District is located in Box Elder, South Dakota. It's in Western South Dakota, and we are a community school of approximately 2,700 students who also proudly serve the families of Ellsworth Air Force Base, which is the home of the B-1 bomber. And for those of you that don't know, the future home of the new stealth bomber, the B-21 Raider. We're very proud of that. Douglas set aside some ESSER dollars for 2 pre-K classes for the upcoming 24-25 school year. And we sent out a wait list late in the afternoon on day 1, and by the next morning we already had 48 responses. In 24 hours we reached 90. We pushed it out one more time and we were at 120, and we finally just stopped because we knew we were only going to have 2 cohorts of 18. So then we had to pre-screen those students based on priorities and high needs and funding functions. So the priority criteria were free and reduced lunch eligibility, active duty military family member, qualifies for EL services and foster care, homeless, from single parent household or teenage parent, qualifies for special ed and or speech. So 20 students did not meet any criteria. All students who are already received Head Start were maintained in Head Start, which left 80 to screen, and finally 36 were selected. So for reference, we have 2 classes of Head Start here at Douglas School District in the building that I'm in, which serves approximately 40 students. We'll now have 36 of 4-year-olds, and our kindergarten cohorts are still around 250. So that still leaves 70% of students without access to early childhood ed. So in conclusion, investing in early childhood education and fully funding the IDEA are essential steps toward building a brighter future for all children. As congressional education staffers, those of us doing the advocacy, the Committee for Education Funding, and members of the press, you have the power to influence policy and make a difference in the lives of millions of children across the country. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monica. I will now pass it over to Dr. Jessica Quinter.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon so that we can share and discuss about our experiences that are currently happening in our K-12 buildings. As a former kindergarten teacher and kind of lifelong elementary educator, I definitely resonate wholeheartedly with the value and importance of early childhood education and the role that that plays in terms of preparing our kindergartners for the start of their school career. I'm located right in the heart of Pennsylvania. We are right near Penn State University. And so our school district is one of the larger in the area. We're just under 7,000 students altogether. My elementary school is one of 8. We have about 430 students and about 85 staff members. What we see a lot in this area because of the university is that we have a lot of transiency. With our students, parents who are coming to maybe be a guest professor or who are coming to complete a higher education degree. And so we see a lot of transiency. And we also have seen, because it's a fairly desired area, we've seen a change in our demographic over the years of families who are coming to our area for specialized services because they know that it is a safe place to come where they, many of them are seeking refuge. We've seen a huge increase in our homeless population as well. And so for our area, just looking at what that demographic change has meant in terms of what we need to provide and how we support families in our school setting. Just this afternoon, prior to coming here, we had our end of the year family picnic. And so there were several hundred families in our school building. And I was reminded of the sage words that whenever we enroll a student, we enroll a family. And really what we need to do is make sure that we're taking care of all of them in that way. Whenever we start really thinking about federal funds and the way that it impacts our school setting, I really am reminded of how all of those different funds kind of work collectively. And so while I think, in terms of regulation and mandate, we think about Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA, they really come all together and intermingle to make sure that we're providing a well-rounded opportunity for our students. In the same way that we know that students need to have basic needs met before they are ready to learn, in the same way that we know they need to have quality instruction so that they feel connected to our school community and are able to grow as well. So really looking at our federal funds and that interplay between them in terms of addressing wellness and well-being of both our students and our educators. One of those funds that we really have looked at in a different way in my district has been Title II. Looking at how are we really making sure that we're providing the professional development that teachers need, specifically looking at our primary levels and reading interventions, making sure that teachers have the right tools as we see students who come in with different needs and learning styles. And so really, whenever we look at Title II, we're looking at professional development, not only for that general education classroom, but then also for what our interventions look like at the advanced tiers. So we can kind of think of that triangle, of the multi-tier system of support triangle for all of our students. The hope is that our general education curriculum will meet 80% of their needs. And then knowing that there are students who will still have some maybe language gaps or math gaps, and what that additional intervention looks like for them in terms of a smaller group or increased fluency. And so in my district, we've really been able to take a look at specific interventions that we've been able to support using those federal funds. Again, to provide teachers with the skills in order to be able to best meet the needs of our students. And specifically thinking of the number of students that we have that come to our district who are English language learners, and how we can really support that language development for them as well. That Title II really directly correlates with our Title I as well. For us, we use those funds specifically for reading specialists and math interventionists. Those the local commitment to that has changed a little bit over time as well, just as we continue to see more and more students who come to us in need of some of those specific interventions. So I think really looking at Title I and Title II, we look at connecting that with the structured literacy, with our interventions and tiered levels. We're really seeing a lot of success, which is really fun, with kindergarten, first and second graders who are struggling to learn to read. And obviously, it's really great to see kind of that light bulb go and to see them build that confidence in their own learning and what they're able to share. And again, we've really seen that as well with our students who are English language learners, and what that programming has been able to support them in our school settings as well. Again, creating that connection, again, creating confidence. And we know, like, once we start to feel that self-efficacy, how it continues to drive all of those pieces as well for us. I also think of kind of the Title I and Title II, all of our federal funding kind of comes with, right, like a pretty structured guardrail. It's a pretty structured system. And what that does is it really allows us to help make sure that we're meeting the needs of our neediest students, of our neediest families, and what that might look like for each of them in that sense as well. Our school district has also received Title IV funds, and we really use that to kind of wrap around that connection piece for families. And so we look at a summer program. We make sure that we have a counselor present at that summer program. We make sure that whenever we're looking at our screeners, and whether that be for students who are struggling or perhaps students who we might want to gather more information on in terms of giftedness, we also look at how can we make sure that that is equitable for all of our students. So really looking at all four of the title funds, kind of working in an intermingled way to make sure that we're providing all of those opportunities for our students as well. Of course, IDEA, as Monica was sharing about, plays a huge role in what we do in our day-to-day workings within a school setting. Certainly, we have a number of students who receive special education services. We know that that current funding is at about 13%, and so it certainly doesn't cover all of the needs for all of the students and what that could look like in our school setting. We have, in our district, we have looked at kind of state grants, local grants, other ways that we can help to support and really provide higher levels of support for students. Not only are we seeing higher numbers, but we're also seeing more significant needs for students that just require more support in the school setting. I would be remiss to not share during this conversation the impact of what the ESSER and ARP funding has had in our school setting. Obviously, we knew that it would be going away. We knew that it was kind of that boost that we needed during the pandemic. What has become apparent to us is that our needs were changing and our demographic was changing prior to the pandemic. And I believe that it has been accelerated kind of during that time and since. And so we were able to really provide services to students in a very different way. We were able to look at a more in-depth summer program for students to receive not only academic support, but also STEM lessons, lessons for our English language learners, making sure that those social emotional piece was in there as well. And over time, we've had to kind of decrease that offering. Our district has been able to still make a commitment to that, which I think has been important and is very beneficial for our school community. And so we're grateful that they've been able to still support that in that way. I also wanted to just kind of highlight some other ways that federal funds indirectly support our schools and our families. Everything from our school nutrition program to our preschools, looking at Head Start and some other early intervention services, to funding that comes into play for homelessness within our community, and also funding that has come into play with our local food bank. And this has really been a critical collaboration between the school district and all of these community organizations and services as well. One of the benefits that our school district had moved to during the ARP-ESSER funding time was the idea of a K-12 family liaison. And that position really was created to create a connection between our families and the school and the community. And so that person has done a tremendous job and has worked in terms of things like a family is new to our country. How do they establish with a physician? How can they go to a food bank and find foods that they would normally eat from their ethnicity or from their culture? And so that position has been one that our district has really found the value in and has tried to creatively use some other funds to be able to keep that as well. But certainly acknowledging the role that all of those community services also play in relation to our school setting too. So I think kind of to wrap up in my section, thinking about the K-12 setting, federal funds are really, really critically important for our students and staff and making sure that we're meeting the needs of all who are in our school community. Each of those programs is obviously very important in its own way and for the purposes that they're designed, but practically speaking, they really work together at the school level in terms of professional development, academic interventions, and those well-rounded educational opportunities for our students. Again, really looking at those funds and the ways that we are sure that we are meeting the needs and identifying our students who are most in need and making sure that the way that we're adhering to those federal guidelines for our federal programs and really elevating that focus of the needs of our students, which continue to evolve and grow. It definitely looks a little different now in a K-12 building or a K-5 building than it did not only pre-pandemic, but than it did many years before that as well. And if we are truly enrolling families and taking care of our students, that also means that we're taking care of our teachers and our staff members and our community members as well. And so as our needs continue to change and grow, we need to make sure that we're making a commitment to meet all of those needs. I think school leaders, obviously, who are all former teachers, are very resourceful. We try to make the most out of what we have. And so whenever we look at federal funding, we're really making sure that we're putting those to good use so that we're being very creative about that and just trying to find ways to see the biggest impact in the way that we use those funds. So certainly, continue to support in that area. We see the difference that it makes every single day, and we see the difference that it makes in the lives of our students as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Quinter. I will now pass it over to Gianna Covarelli.
Thank you so much, Emily. As she mentioned, I am Gianna Covarelli. I am a recent graduate of TWU for undergrad. She wasn't that far off, though. I will be continuing into grad school, so still stay in that student status. First, I want to say thank you to everyone, all the attendees, our Hill members, our Senate and staffers, as well as any members of press. And I want to send my thanks to CEF for reaching out and having me join y'all here today. I would love to start with some kind of background history in regards to funding, and a lot of my perspective, of course, as student regent for the TWU system, will circumvent our very unique and very diverse population at TWU, but also it's becoming the trend in Texas across the board at many universities and systems. The first statistic really is, if you glance back 30 years ago, funding, if you would see it as a pie chart, the funding for higher education was completely different. It was approximately about 2/3 of it would be state, some federal support, but mostly state funding, and 1/3 of the pie would be made up of student tuition. And that expense has flip-flopped. We only receive about 1/3 of state funding to counteract 2/3 will now be on the student in regards to tuition. And the necessity to lay this kind of groundwork, in my opinion, is the real impact it's having on students, on families. As my previous two presenters have mentioned, all of those experiences, all those difficulties and challenges are impacting students as well, either as themselves as children growing up through those systems, or as parents, as the number one alternative school or school for student parents in Texas. We have plethora of stories from either single parents or just young parents that have returned to college or are still continuing with children of their own. And so the difficulties they're facing in those two aspects of life, in addition to higher education, are really compounding when especially it comes to tuition factor. The personal element I'd like to bring to this is because how federal funding plays in is largely through Pell, of course. And being a Pell recipient myself, it was the only way I was coming to college. Whether it was through scholarship and addition to Pell, I worked full time through undergrad to put myself through college in addition to Pell. But really, before I got that notification letter of my Pell scholarship, I wasn't certain if that was the correct time for me to come to college because of the financial strain 4-year commitment would really bring. And that's what it's boiled down to us. And higher education is that 4-year commitment. Can we keep our retention of students for all 4 years? Can we not only keep them on campus or keep them enrolled, but can we keep them and get them out in a timely manner for, of course, our sake, but really for theirs, for the less amount of debt, less amount of time that they have to be in either a constrained situation financially or in a different city. We do have a lot coming up to Denton, Dallas. We do have a campus in Houston, so that is more regionally local for a lot of our population. But to come up to a new city, have to start over, as Jessica was saying, with different students coming in, impacting the local ISDs, impacting themselves and disrupting their family system. So we do try to keep students in and out in those 4 years, and by any means possible for us on the university side, but that really comes with working with any financial assistance from federal or state we can. We become very resourceful in programs and opportunities that we will accept and have implemented actually with TWU. So just last month, we did our groundbreaking of the Bezos Academy. So it's going to be a tuition-free Montessori style preschool offered to our students first, student parents for their children to attend. So while they're in class, their students are also in class. So we've become resourceful in how to solve some of these issues that our students are facing. But at the end of the day, there's still only so much we can do when it comes to that 2/3 of the cost is tuition now. So that is really why Pell has become such a large thing, especially as we are starting to see university costs going up across the board, largely due to inflation, as Sarah mentioned at the very beginning, with general costs going up nationwide. And with this in mind, we have become cognitive of what are we offering and how can we promise students that this will be worth their time. And it has led to great intentionality in a lot of our programs. And students appreciate that and see that it still comes down to that 4-year commitment that I also faced 4 years ago. And then housing has really become the other thing. So what we've started kind of referring this as is the circular problem. So we have the student struggles with Pell and financial, the university and higher educations are facing different struggles of their own in order to expand and meet these needs. We first have to demonstrate them, well, in about 4 different sectors. So we have student enrollment that must be constantly going up. In order to meet that, we have to have housing adequate housing for so many numbers. So as students go up, housing has to go up. As both of those go up, especially how many rooms we have for housing, classroom sizes have to go up. As you start seeing this pattern, as everything rises, truly water goes up, all boats should, but all of this also requires institutional money. So that 4th quadrant I mentioned, as student enrollment goes up, classroom sizes must go up, housing must go up, our programs offered must also become more, we have to branch out. We have to start adding different classes, adding classes to existing programs. And TW, I've loved being on this journey for this last year, but it's also, I've seen how difficult it is to balance each of these quadrants all at the same time in order for an institution to receive funding, to receive program grants from federal level as well as state level for specific colleges is fantastic. It does limit the impact we can have on our students in those sectors though, because of course they're capped to just in that area or that area of research. So while we are always glad and appreciate receiving those grants because it alleviates that area and it lets us kind of focus on a different, it does only, they're only offered in certain sectors as well. So we do have other colleges and departments that may never qualify for a similar grant. Additionally, something I've heard from student population a lot actually recently is, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this because of the COVID impact and being a class that just graduated college and really just walked the stage for the first time, having been a COVID grad, is the COVID loss of learning, but really the impact that distance learning has had on us. What has that meant for higher education was a lot of default and resorting to distance learning, Zooms like today, these webinars, we've become familiar over 4 years, but the immediate need of our students when we went to distance learning was adequate technology at home, as well as adequate connectivity. So they may have internet at home, but they didn't have the broadband or the best balance because if everyone's at home now, they didn't have the branch with to stay on a Zoom for an hour and a half for one class, or they didn't even have it to begin with. So a lot of the students have now lost the program that they were originally connected to as the Affordable Connectivity Program, as that did expire just this last spring. And in college, when you're, as I mentioned, budgeting with everything and on that type thing, Pell eligibility was an immediate factor for ACP. And if you qualified for that, it was really a great weight off your shoulders because you're trying to do everything you can, of course, to combat the higher costs of education going up and just everything along the way. But when that dropped and students kind of have scrambled to sometimes figure out, well, what's my next step? Do I have to move back on campus? Well, that rolls into what I mentioned previously is our enrollment's going up, our housings are capping. So we're figuring out, can we as a university take on a housing crisis almost, because students need to be on campus for different reasons, whether it's personal or just connectivity or just desirability. But all of these factors just kind of going into each other and compounding is what we've called the wheel of struggle sometimes. And then I really would be remiss if I didn't say at the same time, it's been wonderful to see how students are being resilient through these trials. And we have fantastic programs that are accelerating, and really the hope of the students and the hope of the better future is really what's driving them. in the face of all these challenges. And I think in the end, that's that extra boost of support is what they're asking for and what institutions are asking for as well, so that we can continue to fund those dreams. And as we say right now, as we're in a campaign ourselves, is to continue to dream big, and open those doors still further. So I'll end it there and just thank you again for listening today and this invitation. It's been a wonderful opportunity.
Great. I know that I'm sure folks are already chomping at the bit for Q&A. And so before we get to that, I will hand it over to Nita Rancourt to kind of circle it off here, and then we'll go on to Q&A.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share something that I'm very passionate about, and that is the critical need for adult education funding and why this investment is essential for community growth, not only locally, but throughout our state and nation. Just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about our technical college. We are celebrating 50 years as an institution this year, wrapping that up, and also celebrating 45 years as an accredited institution. So we're excited about that. I've been here at Atlantic for about 18 years, first as an assistant director, and then now as a director and principal of our technical high school. Prior to that, I had the privilege of managing and supporting district-wide adult and family literacy programs in the second largest program in the state. So I've seen a lot of change. I'm very passionate about the work that we do and live and breathe adult career and technical education. And hearing the other panelists, I feel like I've had the best of all worlds, because my career started in bringing family literacy to our district, a family literacy model, working with parents who needed to earn their high school diploma through a GED prep program, or gain English language skills under the same roof as their preschool age children. So know about the intergenerational impact that it has on lives forever. With regard to what we have here to offer at Atlantic Technical College, we are the largest technical college in the state, offering 36 high-skill, high-wage programs. We do talk a lot about individuals coming because they can come to us and get a career in a year, because 90% of our current technical programs can be completed in 1 calendar year or less. We do have the largest apprenticeship program in the state, and that's probably what makes us the biggest technical college in the state, with 14 different occupations, along with a full complement, the largest adult general ed program in our district, with adult basic education, GED preparation, and our largest program in the county, which is our adult English for speakers of other languages, the ESOL program. One of the things we do emphasize, and you'll hear more about this, is integrated education and training, and really looking at teaching concurrently and contextually those workforce preparation and academic skills, getting people ready for various occupations. And we do stand behind our programs. We do have a guarantee for success. So if you complete one of our programs, but you do not pass the industry-related exam, that will bring you back at no charge, so that you can be successful in meeting that and earning that credential. And again, as mentioned, we do serve over 8,000 students annually. We're one of 3 technical colleges in the county. There are actually 8 campuses district-wide, and we are commonly referred to as the Broward Technical Colleges, which you'll see on the next slide. It is Atlantic Technical College, McFadder Technical College, and Sheridan. We are proud to be ranked #1 in Florida for post-secondary industry certification attainment, now for the 8th year in a row. We are a little bit competitive, but we are part of a Florida technical college system, so we're one of 48 technical colleges in the state. And we are results-driven. 84% on average of our, we have a statewide completion rate of 84%, 86% job placement rate, and 92% statewide licensure rate. But now to take a look at the state perspective for adult education. As you can see on the next slide, there are a significant number of adults in the state and the nation, as we know, in need of a high school credential and of English language skills. And of course, our mission is to remove barriers for these individuals so that they can build skills that they need to be successful. That's going to lead them into post-secondary education and, of course, sustainable employment, resulting in economic self-sufficiency. And our emphasis is on integrated education and training, making that relevant for the student so that they can get into the workforce and or be upskilled. And we can see that our state's commitment, if you look at the funding on this slide, you can see the state's commitment in adult education, and federal funding does supplement us considerably. And all of those supplemental dollars do help us in helping students live their dreams. So in looking at ways in which you can help, one way, and if we look at the next slide, is to look at in supporting Adult Ed Works Act or like legislation. You know, there has been a funding request to invest $810 million in adult education state grants for fiscal year 25. If properly resourced and supported, adult education can be the difference between families failing to make ends meet and securing a family sustaining wage, while ensuring that our employers have access to a pool of skilled workforce. Additional funding is needed to meet the high demand for adult education and enable programmings to best serve their students, whether it be in person, online, or in hybrid settings. I know we heard a lot from the panelists with supporting all of that. Online and hybrid classes provide flexibility for learners who are often juggling work and family responsibilities while participating in adult ed programs. But oftentimes there are funding limitations that do not allow them to do this. So if funding is boosted to a level that would better meet the demand and need, adult ed programs can help adult learners gain necessary workforce and life skills that are going to open the doors to opportunities that they may otherwise not be able to access, while ensuring a healthy, resilient economy that lifts up all communities. Next, the reauthorization of Workforce Innovation and the Opportunity Act does provide a significant opportunity to improve the adult education system, piloting new approaches to measuring program performance and learner outcomes, while also ensuring that adult learners gain needed digital literacy and information literacy skills, devoting additional resources, of course, to professional development for practitioners. I know we've heard other panelists say the same. Also looking to provide opportunities to professionalize the adult educator field, adding adult education representation on state and local workforce boards to strengthen coordination throughout the entire workforce development system, and continuing to emphasize and support integrated education and training programs while also incorporating things that are in Adult Ed Work Act into the WIOA authorization is something for consideration. And looking at funding priorities to understand how to best educate and upskill our nation's 43 million adults who are low skilled in literacy. We know that it's critical that the work of practitioners and stakeholders, policymakers are informed by relevant, actionable, and recent research in adult literacy. In looking at some of the work of the Commission for Adult Basic Education and the state adult education systems, we are in urgent need of identifying and disseminating innovative and effective methods for supporting our adult learners, as well as taking a look at those limited restrictions in financial aid opportunities, which would allow to decrease some of the barriers to participation and improve learner persistence, which we have heard from our last panelist as well. But I always like to speak from the perspective of the success stories. So just taking some time to hear some of the successes that we've had here at Atlantic. First, talking about Darlene. Her educational journey in the United States has been one of determination and resilience. She began her studies in our evening adult ESOL program at the main campus. She overcame numerous challenges as she adjusted to a new language and culture. With a clear goal of pursuing a career in nursing, Darlene enrolled in our patient care assistant Integrated Education and Training Program, demonstrating her commitment and passion to the healthcare field. She earned her certified nursing assistant credential, but it didn't stop there. Darlie continued her education by enrolling in a practical nursing program. She's now in her last course and is set to complete her program in less than a month. And she's poised to achieve her dream of becoming a nurse. And I do plan to see her at graduation. So Darlie is an example of what can happen when a student enrolls in adult ESOL and continues on to further education and work towards a high skill, high wage employment. Her dream was made possible with financial assistance received from the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds, as well as a Pell Grant. Now taking a look at Marie. Marie's journey to success in the United States began with her arrival, along with her 2 children facing numerous challenges. Determined to build a better future in the United States, Marie enrolled in ESOL classes at our Coconut Creek campus, starting at the low intermediate level. Balancing her studies with the responsibility of daycare for her children was no easy feat, but her perseverance paid off. She later joined our Integrated Education and Training hemodialysis program, where her hard work and dedication led to her fulfilling a career. Today, Marie is a proud hemodialysis technician, exemplifying her resilience and the pursuit of excellence. As was true with Darlie, Marie is another example when a student enrolls in adult ESOL and transitions into an IET program to further her education and gain employment, that her dream is possible. And that was made possible with financial assistance that was received from an open door grant that was funded through the CARES Act. Next up is one of my newest employees, Blondell. Blondell began his educational journey as an adult ESOL student. From the moment he arrived, his determination and enthusiasm for learning was evident. His dedication led him to transfer into our Integrated and Education Training Program and subsequently enrolling in our Accounting Operations Program. He was also a recipient of the Open Door Grant. Blondell successfully completed his studies and now works in our financial aid office, embodying the spirit of perseverance and achievement. Blondell exemplifies what happens when students enroll in ESOL with a desire to grow and gain educational skills, again leading to gainful employment with his newly acquired skills. And last up, Maria. Maria came to the United States in 1991 from El Salvador. Her parents could not afford to send her to school. She had to work as a housekeeper from a very young age to help support the family. She got married in 1992 and had 2 children. In 1999, she returned to El Salvador with her children, and her husband stayed in Florida. She returned to the United States in 2008 to be reunited with her husband. Upon her return, she enrolled in adult ESOL classes, which she completed through the advanced level. She then enrolled in adult basic education, leading to her transitioning to GED classes, but still functioning at lower literacy levels. But she was determined. In 3 years, she was able to earn her high school diploma. But Marie didn't stop there. She enrolled and completed our culinary arts program and is now working in industry. These short stories showcase just 4 of thousands of individuals that are positively impacted every day because of opportunities that are afforded to them that help them with financial barriers and decreasing barriers to participation, which makes the difference in their lives forever. And with that, I'm going to turn it back, say thank you for the opportunity today.
Wonderful. Thank you to all the panelists. And I will now turn it over back to Sarah Abernathy to moderate a Q&A.
Well, thank you all so much. It's really interesting, the weaving of discussion about ongoing federal support for various title programs and K-12, for special ed, for Pell Grants and other student aid and institutional aid, as well as the adult education program. And I know almost all of you use some acronyms that cover the emergency COVID relief funding, which my initial chart sort of showed the chunk of fairly steady money for the Department of Ed, but in response to the pandemic, the federal government provided a huge amount of incredibly important money for education. ESSER stands for elementary and secondary education. I've got elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, ESSER. HERF is the higher education relief fund, various different laws. That funding was really important, and all of it has ended. And so my question to all of you is, although the funding has ended, I don't think that all the extra needs have ended. And while we may not need to buy hand sanitizer in bulk anymore, there are additional needs. I wondered if you could address, whoever wants to, in your area, if you see ways where needs are going to continue and where federal funding would make a difference. Not that the government is looking at providing additional emergency funding, but it is making decisions about how to fund regular ongoing programs this year.
From the adult ed perspective, one of the things that helped us and helped students was the restrictions that were removed when we looked at things like tuition assistance or emergency relief grants, student grants that helped individuals with decreasing barriers to participation, along with helping them to persist in their learning. You know, things like transportation and working towards childcare and food. Probably one of the things that we see the most is, and I'm often asked, students have to wait before they can even continue their education because access to financial assistance can be challenging for them. So that was one thing that helped us considerably, helped students considerably, and now just offering flexibility, whether it's whatever financial assistance program. Right now, Pell has been struggling a little bit, but even offering, opening up opportunity for students there would be significant for programs.
And I forgot, in my enthusiasm to ask you some questions, I wanted to mention that the audience can submit questions in the Q&A box, and we will go there. I knew I had a couple stored up already, so feel free to put questions in the Q&A for the panelists to look at. But wanted to go back and see if anyone else has anything they wanted to talk about in terms of sort of ongoing needs as a result of the pandemic and ways that federal funding could help.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, Jessica.
That's okay. You're good. We're likely to say similar things. I think looking at the K-12 school setting, one of the biggest needs that is facing us every, honestly, minute of every day is the wellness and well-being of our students, and being able to provide appropriate supports for them, whether that's some kind of counseling or therapy or mental health services. And I think that the need for additional support in that area is really critical. We know that we need to take care of that piece first before students are really able to engage in an instructional day and in their learning and what that might look like. And I think that it is surprising to some people that even when you can be in a fairly strong community in terms of resources, both financially and professionally, that there still is that significant need that we're really having a hard time meeting for so many of our students.
From the higher education perspective, it's very similar. I was also going to say mental health services skyrocketed, as we know, during the pandemic, and we are still seeing that trickle down as students are moving up in their education, not only through COVID learning loss, but also just the factor of like still continuing while not addressing those mental issues have impacted those who are now reaching college levels, and it's impacting their learning abilities, it's impacting the way they're learning. And it's something universities are just having to flesh out and kind of figure out, how do we create resources to meet this new demand. Additionally, a flip side of this is, as a recognized like top nursing university, we trudged forward during the pandemic. We kind of marketed with it to A lot of our students wanted to just get out there. They wanted to still help, and a lot of them did, those cohorts in 2021. And so I think recognizing institutions and like kind of that good behavior as we see for those who are striving and honestly trailblazing through hard, difficult times and assisting those programs would be very thankful from a university perspective, but also recognize the students and either through new grants into those specific programs, whether it's nursing or kinesiology, occupational therapy, PT, because they all just went straight into the fields that were suddenly deficient. And also we're meeting mental health needs along the way. There's multiple programs we've heard about. So both of those.
And then I can just jump in real quick from the early childhood level. So first of all, of course, we looked at the stats, but the limited child care centers and daycares were closed for a while. So that even in South Dakota, who wasn't closed as long as other states, but even the small amount of time that some of them were closed, and of course, private ones had the levity to stay closed as long as they felt the need. Children missed out on tons of learning opportunities in those settings, which created a kind of a backlog of children needing preschool. But on top of that, the kids that would have been in those early grades like kinder or perhaps in preschool, they missed out on tons of learning experiences. And again, we know it's in literacy and numeracy, and it's not that those aren't important, but you heard me talk about the doing school, which is the social skills, which that is what I will hear elementary principals talk the most about, is the extreme behavioral needs and support of students at a very, very young age that they have. And these are, decades-long principals that are seeing unprecedented numbers of kids that are struggling with emotional regulation and things like that. And even simple things such as potty training. We have kinder, first, second, some third graders that are still struggling with potty training, which just means that because of their behavior and some of those developmental skills, they're not able to participate like they should, which is going to have an ongoing impact on them throughout their career.
I find, I think that we'll be hearing about the impacts of the pandemic for a generation. Turning to moving forward, Congress, I mentioned early on that the House has started the process today with the first markup in a committee of a fiscal year 25 appropriations bill. The House released the allocations, and the funding for the bill that funds education the total funding is going to be cut by a little more than 10%. The Senate hasn't released its allocations yet, and we don't yet know what the bill would do. I'm curious, what would be the impact in your area if federal funding were cut by 10%? What are the types of things that you would have to see, that you would see happen either in early ed or in teacher training or any of the things, or student aid? Can you give us some examples of what might
Sure.
be the impacts?
Yep, from early something like Head Start, that they're doing the best somehow in getting their percentages of kids enrolled. So 10% cut for even something like that would be longer waiting lists. I think specifically Title I for South Dakota, we have 150 school districts in South Dakota, and more than 140 receive Title I fundings. And so that's been a nice supplement, but it's not enough. So 10% cut to that would be horrid. And special ed, you're going to hear me whine about that forever because that's my world. And then after school, 21st century teacher professional development, we can't meet the needs right now at the funding levels that we're at. And teachers are leaving in droves because of the pressure of educating our little needy people. So I can't imagine that anybody could possibly think this is a good idea. However, I would invite people to just go set foot in a public school. Just go hang out for a day and just see what that would look like.
Higher education, simply put, it will mean massively reduced access to a college degree, and or students will be going and carrying more debt than they already currently are, which has already gone up. due to inflation, due to, as I mentioned, that shift in the pie from 1/3 to 2/3 responsibility is now put on tuition, whereas it used to be from government funding. It's just this loomingness of further responsibility onto the students and individual that used to be offset by government funding. So it will just keep shifting that pie more and more onto the student.
And I think that I would just agree, obviously with the sentiments of both of my colleagues on the screen here, just thinking about just the decrease in support in every facet, whether that's professional development or specific instruction or supports for students. And what we know, again, like I had referred to in my part of the presentation, we're pretty good in education of making the most that we can with the least that we can. But continuing to try to be more creative in that space is really to the detriment of our students and our school communities.
And I agree with everyone. If we're already struggling with meeting the needs of having space for students now and meeting all of those needs, so decreasing that by 10% or less even, of course, is going to reduce program availability. It's going to negatively impact our students, our staff, and really diminish the quality of education that we're able to provide.
Thanks. Someone from the audience submitted a question, talked about the need for increased school resources in the K-12 world. And have you seen that? You'd already mentioned that, but the question was, are students able to get full information on career pathways with the current resources in terms of pathways for, I guess, learning to be a school counselor? I know if this is more of a K-12 question or and I'm not expecting Gianna to be an expert on all colleges and all training, but curious from your input, any of you.
I think similarly to how the role of the teacher or an administrator or anyone has changed in the K-12 setting, the role of the counselor has certainly changed as well. I think traditionally we think of school counselors as attendance, academics, career exploration, career pathways, and now a lot of the role that they're playing on a day-to-day basis is dealing with both acute and ongoing either mental health or social issues with students. And so while certainly the intent is there to continue to develop students and to find their strengths and to explore what they may be within their future, I think that role of the counselor has become stretched as well as any other really position in a school setting has become.
I completely agree with what Jessica said. And though I may not know the full answer from a higher education perspective, I do have a unique perspective having worked in elementary school actually this last semester, doing an internship with community and schools. And so I was in a tier 1 elementary for all of term and working very closely with the on-site counselor, and a lot of what they say is exactly, and they're of course experts in the field being there full time, but exact same down here in Texas with boots on ground. It is an immensely difficult position that school counselors are now transitioning to address these needs differently. I was one of 2 interns at that school. The other was a counseling intern on a master's level. And I think we both walked in knowing it was difficult, and we walked out knowing just the 10% of an iceberg of how difficult it is. Hearing the transition that the ISD is undergoing, what pathways and what careers will be existing next year is also ever changing every year because of funding on ISD levels and different levels from the state. And so I think the real garner, if I'm gauging your question correctly, I'm trying to check it in the Q&A, is the full information on career pathways for current resources. It comes down to how flexible is a person going to be inside that internship and then inside their role and position as they enter that work field, because those are ever changing, as is because of funding is ever changing.
Thanks. And I had a question for Monica. You talked about early childhood education in South Dakota. And in fact, the figures there are, in terms of access, are higher than the national average of only 4 out of 10 children eligible for Head Start can get services, for instance. You talked about how the demand is greater than the supply, and that the early childhood, the 2 rooms you had were oversubscribed within a day. What would be the impact for teaching and learning if federal support for early childhood allowed every child to have access to free preschool as proposed in the president's fiscal year 25 education budget?
Well, I think it's twofold, and I know that we're not here to talk about policy and things like that, but I know that early childhood has been in our legislature since 2015. It's come up, failed, because I think there's this idea and there's this noise about it disrupting the family unit. However, when you look at the stats, and of the 75,000 kids that we have that are under the age of 5, 71% of those kids have all the available parents in the workforce. So there's no doubt that people are going with unmet needs. So I think while I don't want to say that we don't want to keep local control in the state of South Dakota, because we do like to have that, I think there does need to be some agreement in the importance of providing access to that to everybody, because again, it's not typically families that are experiencing wealth that are not accessing these programs, even if they're for pay. It's and the Head Start is meeting the 55%. But again, funding for teachers, finding teachers, finding TAs and things like that has also, I know that this Head Start in my building, simply because it's right here, I've been able to hear firsthand the difficulties, because the pay, especially for teaching assistants and bus drivers and things like that, while they're doing the best they can, they're dealing with kids with lots of needs, and the job is difficult, and the pay does not necessarily meet the job. So I would just say, even for Head Start alone, we're struggling. But as far as universal pre-K, imagine everybody that had a place to send their kid that was high quality. And I think that's the other piece that the federal government could play, is that, part of the problem with some of the preschool programs that exist already, the states that have it, their outcomes, people will tell you their outcomes don't always look that good as far as integration of students with disabilities and the outcomes, because there's really no regulations or standards for that. So I think it's twofold. There's a funding function that would have to happen first, but I also think it would be important to have some sort of developmental standards. South Dakota does have early learning guidelines for the people that happen to have preschools and things like that. But I think it would be twofold to provide that. But again, if you don't have to worry about all of the doing school things and you're ready to learn, because kindergarten is no joke. It is not the kindergarten I went to, and it's probably not the kindergarten even somebody as young as Gianna went to, because they start on day one with literacy and numeracy, and all of the other doing school things are left behind. So
Thanks. And then I wanted to go to the other end and ask Nito, because your student population are those who sort of didn't finish high school with the literacy and numeracy skills they need to go out and be productive and well enough paid to support themselves. And so they're looking for something more. What would be the impact? What could the federal government do to make adult education more available? Is it a matter of funding? Is it a matter of describing the very complicated ways that adult education is provided? What could the federal government do to make adult education more successful or more accessible?
Funding always helps, right? We know that it's something that always helps in every situation. And I talked, increasing opportunities or flexibilities and ways in which we can spend our funding. But looking at things like employer-supported education, investing in digital learning and broadband access. We heard some of that. Looking at partnerships and with community organizations, all in an effort to get people here. I often hear, we get students, of course, who come to us highly educated, but don't have English language skills. And then we have another population who has not been successful in our traditional educational system. They come to us and we can't be delivering the same type of instruction and providing the same resources as they're getting in a K through 12 system because it didn't work. For whatever reason, it didn't work. So is that flexible scheduling? Is it, online learning? What are some of those things and what are those resources and other supportive things? We do a lot with what we might call case management and helping students get to their next steps and exposing them to career pathways, looking at ways in which they're going to get connected to resources. And oftentimes resources just tend to be limited in adult education. But we know we can do a lot with a little bit. So just being able to provide that support with increased funding, but flexibility in the ways in which we're able to use those funds.
Thank you. And there's a question from the audience about funding for rural education or rural school districts. And I know that I tend to think of South Dakota as being a large rural population, and I actually don't think of State College as being that rural, but I know you've got, I'm curious whether you have a sense of, there's actually a rural schools program. There's a different program not funded through the Department of Ed called the Secure Rural Schools Program and other acts. Do you know how those funds are integrated with K through 12 funding on what, are those areas that would also benefit from more funding or different ways of funding?
You're saying me, right?
I think I'm looking at you, but I'm happy to have anybody answer the question who wants to.
Sure. Again, so if you're not familiar with South Dakota, a large amount of our geography is dedicated to reservations. So there is, there's a lot of federal funding available for there, but we do have pockets of fairly rural areas. And I guess how they leverage fund, a lot of the times there's impact aid, right? If that's one way that we use money. At Douglas, of course, we get heavily impacted aid because some of our land is designated for the Air Force Base. And so those are funding options that are available for rural areas or where land is being used for other things. However, the one, we had the big push with COVID relief dollars of access technology and things like that. However, when you're in the middle of nowhere and you have a hotspot, but there's nothing within, hundreds of miles for that hotspot to hitch up to, that was an issue. So I'm not sure about some of the state infrastructure for getting access to remote areas. But I know that has been a push here in South Dakota, even on tribal lands too, because those can tend to be very remote. But I know also that some of the schools that I used to serve as a coach, one of which was one of the larger reservations, still used a ton of their the typical federal dollars for transportation, and they would just run thousands of miles a week to make sure kids actually just had access to school, because I think the general consensus is when they're at school, they're doing better. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
it does. And I thank you. I wanted to ask one final question before turning it over to Cheryl to sort of talk a little bit about what CEF is doing and how people can play a role or help learn more. Final question for any or all of you is, CEF talks about education along the continuum, and we have an early ed, a K through 12, a higher ed, an adult ed person here. What would be your best argument or your most persuasive point about how federal funding can be used effectively in your area of education? I don't know if we want to go along the continuum or Monica, do you want to start off?
Sure. Yes, I would say I like my bio said, I've worked in behavior my whole life, and I would always say If you can prevent it, if you can predict it, you can prevent it. I think we are, in the grand scheme of early childhood ed and what kids are coming to school missing, we can predict it, but we're just not able to prevent it because we don't have the resources available to catch those kids real early. And then we have this compounding cumulative effect when they come to kindergarten and they're still working on all those developmental skills, which are just what makes all of us who we are. And that sometimes it does require some direct opportunity to learn how to do those things. You know, kids are not learning these things running the neighborhoods anymore. All of those things how we learn to navigate the world, you know, that kids don't have that opportunity anymore. The place they have that opportunity is if they're able to come to school. And in those developmental ages, the quicker you can intervene on all of those things, the better off those kids are gonna be for themselves and for their peers. You know, some kids do have some of those skills early, but if we can say we can already predict it, and we can, instead of admiring the problem, I would say preventing it is the best use of money we could have at this point in time. And it's silly to think that we would sit around continuing to admire the problem and allow these large cohorts of kids to keep going through without what they need, and then compounding their success so that they end up clear along the continuum and not succeeding like they should.
Great.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Monica just said as we transition students from that early childhood level to the elementary, middle, and high school level. I think the biggest way that federal funds can effectively impact achievement and outcomes is really by just providing equitable access to instruction and interventions for students. And so whenever we're using those funds to provide professional development for teachers and staff members so that they're better able to predict, respond, and support students. And then also that we're making sure that we're providing opportunities for all of our students and not students who live in a certain area or attend a certain school, but making sure that we're really looking at that in terms of equity so that all students have the chance to be successful as they grow.
In the realm of higher education, it of course is boiling back down to Pell Grants. As I mentioned, being a recipient myself, my Pell Grant covered less than half my tuition. And I think that is a staggering statistic we're going to continue to see as inflation's rising and tuition costs are going up, as mentioned previously. I think it's also worth noting, if you want to look at a factor of expanding Pell or ways you can expand Pell, also looking and recognizing, as I mentioned, that good behavior of students and universities that are not only in programs, but competing with other programs at equal to or higher levels. So we have a NASA program within our kinesiology department, and they are competing with some of the largest universities in Texas and other states against their engineering programs without engineering backgrounds. So we have that ingenuity. And I think if our students are capable of that ingenuity, we can start using that same ingenuity when it comes to funding it as well.
And I don't think I could say it any better than Jessica, but federal funding for adult education is a catalyst to transforming lives and empowering individuals with the skills that they need to thrive in our community. And we just want to be able to have more equitable access and opportunities for everyone.
Thank you all. Cheryl, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure. First of all, thank you to our amazing panelists. We so appreciate your time and your expertise and all that you shared with our community today. Thank you to the CEF members and the staff from the Hill who were able to join us this afternoon. We really appreciate you carving out some time to be with us. In particular, want to also send a shout out and a thank you to our CEF members who helped get our panelists today. So Myrna Manlowitz with the Council of Administrators of Special Education, David Griffith from the National Association of Elementary School Principals, our extremely awesome president, Emily Crawford, who's with Vectis, and Deborah Kennedy from the National Council for Literacy. We couldn't have pulled this off together without your participation and your help. So thank you so much for helping arrange these wonderful panelists that we've all had the privilege to hear from this afternoon. Just a couple of quick administrative announcements to share with everyone. For everyone who signed up for the briefing today, both CEF members and Hill staff, you'll get a link with access to the electronic version of our budget book after this briefing. At a later date, it goes on CEF's website, but not initially. It's initially a membership benefit and also available for the staff. What is on the website at this point is all of CEF's charts that are in a downloadable form, some of the video vignettes from the education book, and the video from this particular briefing will also be posted on the website tomorrow. Lastly, for Hill staff who've requested a physical copy of the budget book, we will be getting those to you. And if you haven't asked for that, you can simply email us at info@cef.org and provide your name and your office, and we'll arrange to get one delivered to you in early June. Final note, we just want to again encourage everyone to come to our website where all of our advocacy materials are housed. We've done a tremendous amount of work in the first 6 months of this year, including witness testimony at the Labor H Education Subcommittee, letters we've written to the Hill, our funding tables, fact sheets, and of course, all the work that we try to do on our social media campaigns as well. So if you haven't in a while, take a moment to visit the website to kind of refresh on all of the incredible resources that are there as we continue our advocacy efforts together. And again, a hearty thank you to all of our panelists for taking time to share your expertise and the important messages this afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. This has been wonderful. And this concludes the briefing.